County Plan. The Thurston County Planning Commission is a resident advisory board to the Board of County Commissioners on land use planning matters, such as comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance amendments. Planning Commission actions are in the form of recommendations to the county commissioners, who are the final decision makers. All Planning Commission meetings are open to the public. Community members are welcome to observe all Planning Commission briefings and work sessions. We welcome public comment on those issues for which a public hearing has not been held. My name is Derek Day and I serve as the Commission Chair and reside in District 1. We will continue our introductions in the boardroom. Commissioner Bartlett.
Hello, I am Commissioner Bartlett, represent District 5. Scott Nelson, District 4.
Evan Pestinger, District 5.
Bill Chrisburn, District 4, and terribly excited to be sitting next to Commissioner Day tonight. It's the first time.
I'm Eric Pacino. I serve at large and live in the Lacey UGA.
Barry Halverson, District 2.
Daniel Baumgartner, District 1.
Sandy Kaiser from the very beautiful District 3 behind me.
Good evening, Sandy. Backdrop.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I think we can move on to our agenda. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Bill moved. Second. Any discussion? All right, all in favor of approving the agenda?
Hi.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. We have approved our agenda. Next, have folks had a chance to look over our meeting minutes? And if so, I would entertain a motion to approve those.
I move to approve the agenda for meeting minutes for May 1st, 2024, and use the recording as the official record.
Thank you, Commissioner Halverson. Second?
Second.
All right, any discussion on the minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving our minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Same. All right, any opposed? All right, our meeting minutes are approved. All right, I didn't miss anything tonight, did I? Not yet. So, all right, moving on to public communications. So we are open for public comment on issues for which a hearing has not been held. And we'll start on Zoom and then we'll move here to the boardroom. Just a reminder, you'll be promoted to a panelist and you will have 3 minutes per the timer on screen. And it looks like Ms. Sepinen would like to provide comment. We're going to be able to promote. Okay. I believe you're muted.
Hello, this is Loretta Sepinen, City of Olympia. I want to just provide a short comment about one section of the Chapter 9 that you're looking at tonight. This is an idea to add in addition to what's there about parks and trails. And what I'm thinking about is parks and trails that are shorter in length, trails short length, and parks that are very tiny that address the need to be close to people who might be low-income, elderly, and not be in a position to be able to drive off to one of the great trails or any of the parks in the county. And in the 20 years ahead, I'm hoping that we can think about these ideas. Like one concept I have is to have, to buy, or to buy easements along some of our roadways so that separate from the roadway, we can have two paths, one for the bikes and other fast vehicles and one for walkers, so that people can just have places to walk in their neighborhoods, even if they don't get any place. But I'm thinking around Little Rock, I'm thinking between Grand Mound and Rochester as just examples. And parks near mobile home parks that weren't designed to have trees and gardens or anything like that. So I'm asking to have you discuss and consider adding to the chapter the idea of that kind of a park that is not one you drive to, and that kind of a trail that might be short and may go nowhere, but serve the health and well-being of people who might not otherwise be able to get to our parks and trails. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like Phyllis Farrell would like to provide comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for all the work that you are doing. I can't imagine all the reading that you're having to do. My name is Phyllis Farrell. I live in the unincorporated area of Thurston County in the Sunwood Lakes development. And I'd like to comment tonight a little on water. I believe you're going to have a briefing on water availability. And I'd like to point out the League of Women Voters of Thurston County did a study, a water study for Thurston County that was completed in 2023. And I'm not sure if all of you have seen that. I can put the link to it. It's a very comprehensive study, about 35 pages. I would urge that you consider its findings in your deliberations. From the water study, I'm going to quote, in Thurston County, Washington, substantial growth in demand for fresh water is projected during the coming decades. This is in profound contrast to the projected total supply, mostly from precipitation, which is not expected to change. The projections of these contrary trends show that water supplies will be reduced and the seasonal arrival of precipitation will change substantially. Scientific modeling shows shorter, warmer, wetter winters and longer, drier summers. We've already seen these changes as winter has started to begin later and is bringing heavy volumes of rain, often as atmospheric rivers. These episodes of heavy rainfall are too great for the soil to absorb, leaving much of the priceless water lost in runoff. In short, the growing demand for water from population and economic growth will contrast with the projection of no increase in water supplies. The supply of water is projected to remain stable on an annual basis, but change significantly on a seasonal basis. In the decades ahead, challenges to meet both human and ecosystem water needs will intensify. In summary, water conservation and adaptation should be the drivers in county planning for growth and development. And if you'd like, I'll put the link to that study in the chat.
Thank you.
That'd be great.
And we can make sure planning commission gets that.
Thank you. All right, and now we'll move to the boardroom. It looks like we have 4 folks who'd like to provide comment. And we will start with the one and only Karen Frazier.
There's more than one.
Well, good evening. It's a real pleasure to be here and thank you for your service on the Planning Commission. I'm Karen Fraser. I live in unincorporated Thurston County on Cooper Point. And I'm a former county commissioner. My other formers, I'm former Lacey Planning Commission, former Lacey Mayor and City Council and legislator. And in the Senate for many years, I was the chair of the Environment Committee where we dealt with a lot of issues statewide that you're dealing here with the county. So I'm here tonight representing the League of Women Voters on the Water Study, which Phyllis just mentioned. And I have a handout for you. So the first page of the handout is the cover of the study. We did a study of freshwater resources in Thurston County. And what this shows, and this data is from Thurston Regional Planning Council, it shows that the rainfall that we're going to get projected out to 2050 is going to stay about the same. And it shows that the population projections are going to go way up. And so there's a big problem right there, even if everything stays the same. But it's going to get a little worse because of climate change, rainfall patterns are going to change. And we're going to get more rain in the winter, less rain in the summer, and in the winter, it'll come in bigger clumps, you might say. So more of it will be runoff. So a net result will be less groundwater. And we use groundwater for almost everything. So we really want you to be thinking about this as you work on your policies. I included in here a chapter from the study of options for addressing all of this. You can't just throw up your hands and say there's nothing to do. So first of all, the only actual recommendation we're making is that there be created some kind of intergovernmental entity of some kind to pay attention to water resources throughout the county. It's a little segmented right now, you might say. And then strategies, current and emerging strategies. Conservation's number one, lots to be doing in conservation, including preventing waste. Increase storage, do water reuse infrastructure, under stormwater management, slow down the flow of stormwater so more of it will go into the ground. Protect surface and groundwater from pollution, because if you pollute it, it's the equivalent of less water. See what else, I'm just flipping pages here fast. Reduce freeway pollution. There's a lot of pollution from the freeways, listening to like Capitol Lake and other places. Complete the water quality plans mandated by the federal government. Engage in watershed planning and implementation. We have 3 big watersheds in the county and 1 small one. Increase reuse of water, and I know Lot is working on that. Reprioritize existing uses of water. You can't just say everything needs to be the same forever. There's some discussion of that. You can purchase and transfer water rights. There's a whole world of that. Drill deeper wells, reduce landscape watering, a lot of opportunity there. Assure healthy fish-bearing rivers, streams, and lakes, because you need to look at people's needs and the natural world. And we encourage you to take all this into account as you work on county policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Chairman, may I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you're willing. Ms. Fraser, thank you. I consider you a subject matter expert on this, which is why I want to ask the question. I attended some of those forums. I think they were in 2019.
Thank you.
I attended 3 of them. They were amazing, high turnout, very much community interest. Is there any potential sites or locations or opportunities for reservoirs in the county or near to the county?
That we're
watersheds?
studying, and you can have built reservoirs, you can have aquifer storage, and there might be land-based aquifers. So all those, it should be studied by competent engineers.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and next up, we have Rhonda Larson-Kramer.
Thank you for all your work you're doing as well. I echo everything everyone's been saying. So my name is Rhonda Larson-Kramer and I live on East Side Street near Watershed Park, but I have land outside the urban growth area on south of the airport. I wanted to give some input regarding an idea touched upon at the Planning Commission's May 1st meeting. That's the idea that we have a comprehensive plan that has a lot of goals and policies with no teeth. In particular, we have the climate mitigation element of that comprehensive plan, but right now there's nothing requiring specific actions. It merely recommends actions. If we want to actually achieve the goals in our comp plan, we need to create codes that require things to be done in a certain way that mitigates climate change. There's some low-hanging fruit that I'd like to bring to your attention in this regard. The 2022 UGA swap law is something that the county could create implementing regulations for that aim to address climate change. King County, as some of you may know, is creating regulations to implement the UGA swap law before King County approves any swaps. Our county should take the same approach so that the implementation of the state law reflects our local priorities and values. The particular state law, without more refinement at the local level, can result in a loss of natural resource lands. And I'm not sure many people are aware of this. The reason is that it doesn't have any requirement regarding preservation of natural resource lands. All it requires is that there be no more acres of land inside the urban growth area once the swap is all done. So let me give you an illustration. The proposed Bar Holdings UGA swap that's on the docket proposes to swap land out of the UGA near Black Lake. That land is already preserved from development. It has power line easements, it has existing regulations on floodways, wetlands, and steep slopes. So it's not developable land. So after the swap, that land is going to be out of the urban growth area, but it's going to be no better off as in terms of preservation of natural resources than it is now. The land swapped into the urban growth area, in contrast, will be converted to development. That land is 33 acres of forest land. That's on the corner of 93rd and Old Highway 99 south of the airport. The end result of this proposed swap would be a net loss in 33 acres of natural resource lands. So I suggest that we abstain, like King County, from doing any swaps under the swap law until we have created policies and regulations that ensure that any swap we do is consistent with the climate mitigation element of the comp plan. We need to create good policy and processes when a new avenue of land use decision-making is put on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and next up will be, is it Betsy Norton? Okay. You can tell if it was an N or an M. Go ahead.
Sorry about my writing. I'm here, my name is Betsy Norton, I live in Olympia, and I'm here just to put in a brief comment for the Black Hills Audubon Society, the committee. We're submitting these brief preliminary comments just to add to prior recommendations delivered to the staff last week in the local government committee. We'd like to highlight a few recommendations regarding water resource management in the comp plan and let you know we'll be submitting substantial comments in subsequent weeks. We recommend that you consider the importance of access to water in the county. And when you're doing that, you include wildlife in your list of water consumers and especially prioritize federal and state listed endangered and threatened species. From our review of drafts so far, we don't see any comp plan mention of the need to protect wildlife habitat or to ensure that adequate water quality and quantity is maintained for their survival in the county. We recommend you take a look at the allocation of water resources of the state from an environmental point of view, as opposed to the economic development or the legal rights point of view. Recognizing that our increasingly scarce water resources have to serve wildlife and commercial operations, I would say in that order. In addition, climate change, which is increasingly, as you have heard, causing the shorter, wetter winters and the longer, drier summers, exacerbates the challenges to wildlife habitat. Finally, water management from a geographic perspective. If you're looking at a GIS map and you look at the water allocations, where things are, where development is being requested and that sort of thing, you will see it demonstrates that the drawdowns on water resources are really localized, which severely constrains the use of solutions like water mitigation plans, which provide basin-wide or RIA widen migrate mitigation opportunities, because you can't dry up a stream and then provide water in another stream. This stream is still dead. So you need to do something like that. This is really technical. So we recommend you fully understand things like the relationship between groundwater levels and surface water. And we recommend you make full use of the scientists at your elbows to really understand the risks and opportunities in this area. And these would include the Thurston County hydrologists, Washington State Departments of Fish and Wildlife and Ecology, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, WSU and UW researchers. They're all available. If you have questions about things or you're looking for innovative techniques, those people should be pulled into your conversations. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and next up is Adam Espino Jr.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Aiden Spino Jr. I live in Olympia, but I'm here mostly speaking to my capacity with the Thurston County Habitat for Humanity. I was very interested in the comprehensive plan and with the housing element coming up. We figured we'd start blabbing at you. So I think just two things on the top of our minds right now. I think first and foremost, we're trying to, I think, really scale up our production of permanently affordable homeownership units. And it's just facing reality that land and construction time is just becoming an increasingly almost insurmountable barrier. Thankfully for a couple of our projects, particularly the Boulevard Road project that we are partnering with the city of Olympia on, we have the land. But you know, getting through land use and permitting and I think having the policy and structural support for affordable housing development is something that I think we're seeing is missing. Now, City of Olympia, that particular project being in the City of Olympia limits does not obviously intersect here, but I think broadly for us to even consider building in let's say less urban areas or less traditional areas, it has to be, I think, reflected not only in the comprehensive plan, but also in the development code. Because I think philosophically and for many good reasons, right, the existing building code and comprehensive plan is more about restricting development and guiding development than permitting development. And I think in our view with affordable housing being such short supply, we might start to rethink that a little bit. So I guess to the second half of my comments is in regards to the comprehensive plan, we would definitely suggest to start looking within the housing element in particular, how to permit and encourage affordable housing development in particular. Obviously, we have our own ideas. I think I've mentioned to a couple of folk that I know on the commission and staff about kind of zoning techniques that we could potentially use. I think that conjoined with, I think, fairly ambitious goal in the comprehensive plan, as well as potential, I think, new standard within the development code will go a really, really long way to help organizations like Habitat for Humanity, but others like Homes First and Low Income Housing Institute, maybe even private sector market developers to really be able to justify projects. I mean, I'll just end by saying, you know, and this is not to down on the City of Olympia, it's just the reality. When we were first starting to look at land use and permitting for Boulevard, it was about 9 months and $1 million. And now there's no shovels into that at all. So anyways, I'll stop there.
Yeah, just a second. I think Commissioner Kaiser's had her hand up for a moment. So go ahead. But
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank the public commenters for their incredible gifts to us this evening. They've really raised some very important points that we really should be considering. And I was also thinking about how blessed we are to have an organization such as the Thurston County League of Women Voters, who have really been looking very seriously at water issues since 2008. And from not just a lay perspective, but from an expert point of view. And they've really done the work, and I'm just so grateful that they raised that up to us this evening.
Thank you. Commissioner Bartlett, then Commissioner.
Yeah, I just wanted to check in. So you said that you have some specific policy proposals, and I'm assuming that those are being transmitted to the staff.
They certainly will be.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like something that we'd be very interested in hearing more about. I'm also interested in the idea, so specifically the balance that we've talked about this a fair bit in previous meetings, but when you're talking about low-income housing, you're talking about placing of it, like low-income housing is not low-income housing if it's in a place that low-income people can't live and work. So a lot of times we're talking about creating easements within areas that would otherwise be that would need to be a certain level of transit accessible and other things that would otherwise drive market prices up. So it's an area where it seems like a market-based solution isn't going to be useful, where specifically we need to have areas that are set aside sort of preemptively for that. I guess I'm just, when you submit your proposals, that's something that I would definitely want you to keep in mind. If you have anything like that already, I would love to see it.
Well, I'll just say generally, I think first, kind of what I was referencing is, I think zoning allowances for affordable housing projects to sort of meet a separate standard. Assuming they're, I think in our opinion, 100% affordable. There are cities and counties across the country that have lower thresholds, such as 20 or 30%. You know, we do 100% affordability, so it just makes sense that way. But I think to your question, I think that's partly what I'm trying to mean philosophically here, you know, and I think the state legislature is also very interested in supporting communities and projects that are rethinking their development. So, for example, with transit-oriented development, as you're referencing, you know, there's not necessarily a clear definition of TOD as they define it now. It's more, you know, I think in spirit, intended to be for like Tacoma or Seattle or, you know, basically all of King County. But I think for a community like Olympia or Thurston County or Lacey, Tomah, or any of those areas, you know, I think in areas that make sense for the community, it's sort of a medium up zone, you know, think duplexes, townhomes, row houses, triplexes. This is what Habitat for Humanity builds. It's still such a barrier to do that, but there are, I think there's funding from the state to potentially look at supporting communities and projects that locate larger sort of medium density communities near TOD. And the definitions for bus oriented transit-oriented development is very ill-defined. The only definition I really found in statute, state statute, said that it could be 30 minutes interval, and that's what intercity transit provides. You know, talking around, there doesn't seem to be a very clear definition, even in the administrative code. Obviously, the spirit is, like I aforementioned, to be for very dense projects, but I don't see why, you know, we can't think about how that looks like for our community, you know, and I think in how I understand the state legislature, you know, I don't think that they necessarily want to see skyscrapers go up everywhere if people don't want that, but maybe, you know, increased housing options. And, you know, I can ramble on, but I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Commissioner Casino, you had a.
Well, first, thank you for allowing this to turn into Q&A when this is really public comment. And sorry to abuse the system here, but it kind of sounds like you are looking for two tracks. One is within comp plan, maybe finding a zoning allowance for affordable housing through comp plan, but you also need something done in the development code, or you're hoping to get some relief from the development code too. And knowing that we work at the speed of government, you know, comp plan, 1.5 to 2 years, maybe year and a half, maybe. So that would mean development code is another 1.5 after that before it's,
I can provide some clarifying comments if that's helpful for the
Okay.
planning commission, just to contextualize.
Yeah.
It's a great feedback that we're getting. we will be doing housing updates to the development code alongside the comp plan update.
That's very helpful.
So that's one thing.
Mhm.
I will say that at least at this point in time, we're looking more at the rural unincorporated and Grand Mound. So as we think about solutions, a lot of this is solutions or ideas for UGA and the more urban areas in North County. We're gonna be working with the cities on that in the new year in 2025. But remember all of this as we start engaging with the cities. And then to the point about TOD, also understand the intercity strategic plan. Does it include anything outside of the North County cities and just a small line to Yelm? And that the rural transit option provided in South County is actually administered by TRPC. That doesn't mean that we can't be creative. My background is like transit. So I'll just give you that additional information as you're thinking through these ideas.
Okay.
And we really do look forward. We're almost to that point where we can like sit down and have that 2-hour like, oh.
Yeah, I'm really
about
hoping-
housing.
I'm really hoping we can. I'm really hoping that Habitat for Humanity and other outfits like that already have some projects on their short list that they want to work towards, and that we can start tailoring what the county is doing to match up with that and support it. I think that would be a fantastic idea. Thank you very much for coming in.
I have one more question. You said 9 months, $1 million. How many units?
120.
120, okay.
How many units would you like? Do you guys have like a 10-year plan on how many units you'd like to add in the area?
We want to 10x the amount of units by the end of the decade. So we've built about 300 units since our founding.
All right. I hope you do it.
We're trying.
And get a bunch in Grand Mound.
Yeah.
Desert.
Thank you so much. All right. I think that we are ready to move on to continued business. If there's anybody else who wants to comment. All right. Moving on to our work session number 14 for Thurston 2045, Environment, Recreation, and Open Space, Chapter 9.
Amelia's getting that oriented. I just want to say how excited we are to have all of the folks here tonight, as well as the comments we've gotten ahead of this meeting. We are trying something different with this comp plan. We are sending out all the draft chapters at least 2 weeks ahead of the planning commission meeting so that those comments can be considered in your first discussion of an item. So hopefully it's working. Spread the word.
Hello, I am Amelia Schwartz. I'm an associate planner with Thurston County. Tonight, we're going to be going over Chapter 9, the Environment, Recreation, and Open Space Draft Chapter. So this work session, we're going to go over some suggested edits and hopefully get a thumbs up to bring it to a public hearing with the entire plan. We'll go over the public comments that we've received so far and stakeholder engagement and next steps. So covered in this chapter are in the environment, hazards, recreation, and open space. So some of the key changes, that draft changes, of course, for the environment sections are new forestry policies. We are pulling in data from the upcoming tree canopy analysis. We're hoping to align this with the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan, support working forest land conservation goals. We are also expanding our water quality policies. We're hoping to promote water quality and availability protection practices. And we've also added some draft updated habitat conservation policies. Those will better align with the adopted habitat conservation plan and support habitat conservation goals. One of the related survey responses we received was and this is a short quote because I had to fit it in the bubble. So, and of course you have the full quotes available to you. So if you don't love my summary, we've got it full out in a memo. So this one focused on protecting the natural environment for wildlife, water quality, and climate reasons and aesthetic recreation opportunities. So we try to do that. Another section is the hazard section. We have updated policies to reflect the new hazards mitigation plan. There's draft new language to update the critical areas ordinances using geologic hazard data. Prioritizing resources to protect underserved communities and hazards. Preparing to move policies to the new climate element. So if you're going through chapter 9 and seeing all the climate stuff kind of marked out, we're not removing it from the plan, we're shifting it to be part of the actual climate element, the climate chapter. Then we've got some new draft language to enforce required provisions for fire safety. Some of the related survey responses for this was incorporate climate mitigation and resilience information, policy and metrics, hazards planning, and environmental justice priorities. So, like I mentioned, climate mitigation and resilience will be heading towards the climate element. Recreation, we've drafted some new policies to support expanded recreation planning and administration, which we've heard through comments that we're hoping for more. Updated parks information and level of service data, and policies to improve awareness of park rules and regulations. And then these, we had a couple survey responses, and this one was Thurston County is building a competitive advantage with its trails. And then one that really gets to the point, increased parks. More parks. We know what they want. So open space, we've got some draft updated policies to support green space connectivity and partner collaboration. Adding information on open spaces and wildlife corridor connectivity. Considering open and green spaces when evaluating land use and acquisition opportunities. And a new draft map, E4, it's on the next slide, we'll go over it, to show connections and open and green spaces within Thurston County and also the gaps in between them right now. This one is also a hard-hitting survey response, preserve open space. And that's actually a gopher picture from one of our staff out in Thurston County. So yeah, he is a neighbor, or she, they are a neighbor. Yeah, did you?
That was actually my question.
Yes, our wonderful planner, Marissa Wisman, took that photo.
I've heard a number of public commenters say they've never seen one in their life, so I wish I could be here for this. And somebody from Rochester just told me about the marble muralette and described it as a beer can with legs. This picture does better justice.
I've never seen a beer can I wanted to pick up. No. So the new draft map, E4, is open and green space corridor map. This is identifying areas where government lands, forests, parks, and water bodies are connecting and where they aren't. This is not regulatory, but it can be used with or in conjunction with habitat and open and green space connectivity efforts.
Can I just pause here and give you a big kudos? So Amelia has done, I don't even know how many versions of this map, as we've been trying to dial in really what it's supposed to communicate. And so really looking forward to feedback on it. Sorry, you might have to do a few more versions, but to see if it's kind of hitting the mark in terms of providing information that will help our partner agencies as well as us kind of plan in the future.
And I would recommend looking at the PDF version, because especially those in the room right now and on Zoom, the colors can get questionable over a PowerPoint. So I promise it's a little bit better in the PDF. All right, I'll keep moving. So public comment, this PowerPoint was made a little while ago, so it doesn't encompass the comments we got from the Local Good Governance Coalition and the comments we got from last night to this morning. But the Thurston 2045 survey comments are included here. There were 12 comments under the environment section. That included quite a range of topics. So reducing and slowing growth, removing pollution, improving wildfire resilience, incorporating habitat connectivity corridors, mitigating flooding, protecting / restoring environmental quality, improving energy efficiency options. And then comments under the open space and recreation umbrella included increasing parks and trails, preserving open space, Once again, reducing and slowing growth, protecting and improving water quality, including climate mitigation and resilience language. Will hopefully be coming in our climate element. Sorry, the font is so small on this one slide. All right, so stakeholder engagement. We've reached out to quite a few different groups while making this, and of course, it's also been publicly available on our website. I've been keeping good communication lines open with our local tribes. They've seen chapter 9 in its draft form so far. They've submitted any comments they wanted to. We've had this interagency, and then within our agency with water resources, emergency management, public works, environmental health, and the Surface and Stormwater Advisory Board. All right, moving on. So upcoming Thurston 2045 meetings at your next meeting on June 25th. We've got chapter 2, land use, non-housing policies, chapter 3, natural resource lands, and then June 26th, it will be a special meeting on chapter 4, housing and equity. And then links for all of you who can click through a screen. All right, thank you. I hope I was loud enough and fast enough.
That way you just get more time to talk.
Yeah, more time for questions.
Just by any chance, is there any printed copies of today's public comments that are sitting over there somewhere?
I have my personal copies of a comment from Clean Black Lake Alliance and FutureWise.
Look at this.
Yeah,
Thank you.
but if you ask me any questions, you'll have to pass it back.
I guess my first question about overall would be, from your work on this, where do you see the greatest opportunities for us to make improvements?
Well, hopefully we've made those improvements, but of course, there's things we might have missed. I think our big things are the new sections. Habitat connectivity, we might have some opportunities we didn't know we had, but we're always happy to hear back on that. We've got our new section on tree canopy that's coming in. And then, of course, what we have another work session on in just a few minutes are water policies, which Brian has done a fantastic job.
Yeah, and the forestry stuff, the existing comp plan really only speaks to forestry in the natural resource chapter. So looking at forestry as simply a resource industry, extractive resource industry. And so with all of the work we've been doing with the tree canopy study and updating all of our tree protection standards or tree conservation standards, we thought it'd be appropriate to introduce a new section in this chapter that talks about more the ecological function that our forests provide and really opens the door to future research efforts, grant-funded projects around forestry. And that also speaks to what's in the climate mitigation plan and the subsequent carbon sequestration white paper that TRPC completed.
Yeah, I just, I hope that folks got a chance to look at that Clean Black Lake Alliance suggestion, because I think there's a lot of really good meat in it, and a lot of it is around issues that we've discussed before. A lot of the taking shoulds and make them shalls, which I know is already something that we're working on, but I'm glad to hear the reinforcement elsewhere. Specifically though, a lot of the really good comments that we've been getting publicly and a lot of the conversations that we've had have to do with stacking a lot of these problems that we're dealing with. So we're dealing with, how do we trap water? How do we protect frog habitat? How do we protect our watersheds? How do we prevent runoff? And like a lot of those are just coming back into, how do we let ecosystem services handle the things that they're supposed to handle at the scale that we are now putting them through. And so I really appreciated in this public comment, the discussion around moving away from a pesticide sort of a very expensive and constant maintenance sort of top-down pesticide management program around Black Lake specifically, but around watersheds. Basically let beavers do the job that they evolved to do. I liked that, but specifically, I really want to make sure that we are emphasizing wetland creation and restoration. Because I think that hits a number of the issues that we're facing kind of simultaneously. And can be done within the same space. So the same space is hitting a bunch of different jobs. I just wanted to bring that up, and I do want to just recommend that everyone take a look at the Clean Black Lake Alliance message.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, thoughts? On topic mentions? Commissioner Passenger.
A few others. I'm first off curious with our friends here involved with lake management districts, if they have any thoughts or feelings or priorities that they would recommend to us related to water issues and lake management district issues that might be affected by this.
Our lakes are eutrophic right now, which means they're on the lowest category of dying. You got oligraphic, mesotrophic, and eutrophic. And most of the lakes in Thurston County are either mesotrophic or eutrophic, which is the lower end of the category, which means they're in danger of dying. What does that mean? That means that they have low oxygen levels or dissolved oxygen levels, which are DO, which starve fish. It removes fish from certain habitats of the lake, particularly below a certain level in a lake. And how is that done? It's because of vegetation decay, other nutrients that enter the lake, etc., that create a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus in the lake, which impacts the dissolved oxygen in a lake. Our chair knows more about this than I do. So we've been doing a lot of studies on this. In fact, we just commissioned a study by Herrera Associates out of Seattle to start a study on Lake Lawrence next month. We'll be meeting with them in a public meeting. They're going to spend 9 months studying our lake and trying to determine where the phosphorus and nitrogen levels are coming from. We already know that most of it, about 83%, is in the lake. That means it's coming from the sediment within the lake. Now, why is that? It's because of 100 years of, I want to be careful in my wordings, because it's because of agriculture, forestry, and diversion of the Deschutes River into Lake Lawrence to create a reservoir to provide power to the cities of Olympia and Tumwater through Tumwater Falls when the Deschutes River levels were low from August through February. Okay. And all that diversion of the Deschutes River into Lake Lawrence for 20 years increased the sediment in our lake, all the sediment coming down the Deschutes River. You are familiar with the Capitol Lake project, the estuary project, how they have had to dredge it twice already. And now they're looking at this huge $250 million project to dredge it and return it to an estuary. Great idea. Where did all that sediment come from? It came from the Deschutes River. Okay. And the dam held it back from going into Bud Inlet, a lot of it from going into Bud Inlet. Well, when they diverted the Deschutes River into Lake Lawrence, as an example, all that sediment built up over 20 years. We estimate over 20 feet of sediment in 126 acres of the lake. Highly nutritious sediment, which is what has impacted Lake Lawrence for the last 80 years. This was in 1908 to 1928. All the lakes in Thurston County have had similar impacts with sawmills. We had 2 sawmills on Lake Lawrence back in the 1860s to early 1900s. All the lakes in our area, Pattison and Long and Offutt, and all of them had the similar type thing happen. Well, back then, the sawmills didn't burn or carry their sawdust away. What did they do with it? They left it there. The logs were stored in the lake. Everything fell off the logs into the lake, all the bark and stuff like that, creating more sediment, more nutrients to the lake. So our water quality in our local lakes is really bad. Western Washington has a lot of problems with this type of water quality because of growing an economy in Washington State, okay? Not to say that it was bad. We didn't know it was bad at the time. We did what we needed to do to grow our economy, okay? We're not doing it anymore. But your lakes and stuff like that are still dealing with those issues and problems. So we're trying to come up with a solution. Long Lake's working on it right now. Black Lake has been dealing with it for the last 15 years and put millions of dollars into trying to sequester the phosphorus and nutrients in that lake to make it cleaner, healthier, lower the dissolved oxygen levels for fish, salmon habitat, et cetera. So a lot of people are spending a lot of money. Long Lake and Lake Lawrence have spent, just our constituents that live on the lake have spent over $10 million in the last 28 years trying to fix the problems that were created 100 years ago. That's just an example. Yeah.
I may have been wrong a few meetings ago when I said we're not professional historians here.
I wanted to add to what Commissioner Halverson said too, and one of the things that I'd like to keep in mind is when we prioritize these things are what is actually actionable and what would be the most effective. And the hardest conversation we're going to have about that is that our lakes are used, they're literally an asset to our stormwater runoff inventories. And all the development around the lakes, not just the 200-foot SMP buffers, but all the development in the lakes, everything runs down from them, not just the roads and not just the yards, but all of it. And until we start really tackling that, and I think that's probably the thing that we could tackle the easiest and would have the most political will to do. You're not going to be able to take, well, I think we have 1,300 homes or 1,300 residents around our lake. You're not going to pick them all up and move them away. It's just not going to happen. We're not going to let the lake fill back into being a marshland instead of a lake, even though our lake was always a lake. It wasn't, it's not man-made, but there's a lot of people that would like to see it to, it will never be natural again when the rest of Western Washington has humans in it. So I think that if we could, well, I think this all comes down to the drainage design and erosion control manual. I think that's where we're going to have the biggest gains in taking care of our lakes.
Thank you. Commissioner Bartlett?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. And I do think that that's something that we're really going to have to focus on. And I'm glad that it's being brought up now so we can be ready for it. I do think that there's a lot of potential for things like floating wetlands and other stuff that was mentioned in here regarding restoration. I agree that people who live on lakes are not going to not going to let themselves lose access to being able to recreate in those lakes. But I think that there are creative solutions that we can look at to mitigate both the runoff and the ecosystem services that are happening within it.
I didn't want to come off as contrary to your point, because I think your point is very important. And I think that the whole beaver ecology thing is something that the little bit I've been reading on the beaver ecology thing, it's absolutely amazing. I'm not sure how to implement that into lakes that are already built out and are fully humanized.
Yeah.
Maybe Black Lake's not fully humanized though. I mean, it does have a lot more wild areas on it. You guys have a little bit too.
Yeah,
But Long Lake, we're built out all the way around.
yeah, we have about 20% of conservation area on Lake Lawrence.
Yeah.
With 7 beaver dens.
Yeah.
Commissioner Kaiser?
Yeah, I mean, just to contrast, I'm, like I told you here in Totten Inlet, when you look at the chapter, first of all, I want to commend the Planning Commission and for the staff for all the incredible work that's gone into this. I think it's a really amazing body of work, very well reasoned. The thing that makes me sad is to see the words fecal coliform repeat over and over and over. And I know this is a problem on the lakes as well, but in terms of the saltwater, this is tied to people's livelihoods. The shellfish industry in our region is really important. And if we can't get our arms around this issue with leaky septics, that industry is not going to continue to exist.
I'd like to piggyback on Commissioner Kaiser there. One of the things that she's probably hoping for, and I would absolutely agree with, is a pollution identification and control program. And we do not have enough PIC programs or funding for PIC programs. But there's been lots of times there's been terrible pollution that only took 15 minutes for somebody to identify and clean up, like the raccoon latrine over off of Johnson Point, and how that wiped out shellfish for a year. And it was just because of one raccoon nest that was going right into a creek. It was the most ridiculous thing ever. But if we had some emphasis in actually going through and looking to identify these pollution points, or a program to do that, I think that'd be hugely helpful.
Mr. Bartlett?
To piggyback off of your piggyback. Yeah, and I think that this also ties very specifically into houseless sweeps, because that's another form, another source of a lot of this pollution. When we're talking about where folks who cannot afford to live anywhere else are living, one of the problems of a blind sweep approach is that it forces people to just find a place that's relatively obscure, which means that we're less likely to notice that the pollution is happening, and that we're not planning for it. So I think that being really conscious about where we do and don't let folks survive without an income, because we can't help the fact that they're there. We can't help the fact that folks exist. So we need to be really conscious about where we are sweeping folks from, so that we're not just forcing people to end up in areas that are causing a lot more, a disproportionate amount of.
Fair point.
Commissioner Pastor.
Slight change in topics, although I appreciate all of this discussion immensely. Should we, this question for the staff. I know that the Port of Olympia / Swire partnership, which is the Coca-Cola Tumwater efforts, that there's been reports that the plans of those would be deeply impactful to the Tumwater water supply. I know that's not the county's area of purview, but if the county is looking at overall water and water shortages and water concerns, do we yet have any estimate and any plans for county stuff to be able to offset that loss? Do we know how much that loss might be? What does it project out to over the decades? And is there anything in the county level that we can do to mitigate for that?
We can check in with our water resources folks. Kevin Hansen, our hydrogeologist, is probably following that more closely than I am. But it is not reflected currently.
The thing I noticed in here is we have a lot of shoulds related to the Clean Water Act. It should be shalls. Specifically with some of the
policy document issue.
A general note, I just, Maya is back and listened to all the planning commission meetings thus far, and she is doing a sweep through everything that has been presented to try to address the concerns that were raised by the planning commission, that we don't have as many shells as we should. So yes, I hear that, and I'll relay that it applies to this chapter too.
Just a quick thing. I know that there are some areas where we don't have the ability to compel people to do things, but when we do these long lists of shoulds, some things are more important than other things, or some things are existential priorities, whether we say should or shall. Maybe consider using must in those situations, right? It doesn't matter what we should do, we sort of have to do it if we want clean, habitable spaces. It also makes it a little easier to read if anyone from the public doesn't have to read the same first 3 words in every bullet. Just a quick thought.
We're talking about a little bit about triage and like in these plans. I think that a really good system is having a must, a shall, a should. And then if it's honestly, if it's a should or less, like, why is it in there? Like, if it's not, if we're not actually enforcing anything. Like we're providing a good guidelines, I guess, yeah, I think that those are the areas to start looking at.
How do you feel about things that are more exploratory? Where it's, I mean, I guess it could still be a shell, but it's more like we know this is a concern. We don't know exactly how to address it. So it's like shall explore, shall work with our partners. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, so specifically, I was thinking that shoulds are great when they're nested within shalls and musts. So like, shoulds are great for like, you know, we want to explore that. We don't know, we were talking about this earlier, we don't know which of these systems is going to work. And for a given conservation strategy, we want to have the freedom to be able to pursue those as long as it's meeting this overall goal. So the goal is the shall, and then the shoulds come underneath it.
I understand the staff point too, though, that this is the comp plan, not the comp code. As a plan, you can't have definitives like shalls and musts. It really should be shoulds and please do's and mays. But it's in the code where you actually use language like must and shall.
One additional thing, a lot of these lists are sort of context lists for our current state, right? It's a list of things we should be doing, but this is an iterative document that we update every 5 years. So I'm assuming that we're already in progress on a lot of these things. Where possible in the document, if we can acknowledge what is already done, what we're beginning to do, what we've been doing, I feel like it makes it more effective as a forward-looking document to know sort of, I mean, we have the valuable context in the beginning of the document, but the bullet points also, like we should protect groundwater quality and prevent aquifer contamination, degradation, and depletion. It's great. I personally would like to see, like if we're citing specific sites, like continue to or improve on, I don't know, it feels more tactical and less strategic, I guess, but I feel like you need a mix of both.
Amelia, the part you mentioned about the new section on tree canopy, is that in here or?
Yeah. So it should be under section E, healthy forest and tree canopy. And in the track changes document,
I already know
it's on page 11. That's what I was looking for. Sorry for the pause.
And you'll see there are still some sections that we're planning to fill in once that tree canopy study is finalized. Will hopefully be later this summer, and we'll be sure to get that on the planning commission's calendar, so. Here, what,
Am I looking at the wrong document? It's in here?
Do you have the track changes version or is that the clean version?
That looks like clean.
That might, so I'm not sure what page it is on the clean version.
but it is a new section, it should be.
Oh, I found tree canopy.
It's
on
after
page
air
9.
quality.
Oh, before I found it.
Okay.
page 8, 9, 8, and 9, 9. Thank you. One other question. The if I can just take a moment to talk about the League of Women Voters Forum on water. That was a multitude of forums. I think maybe 5 were scheduled, at least 4 happened that were in 2019 and maybe 2018. Was anyone here on the planning commission or staff able to attend any of those?
Could you repeat what the event was again?
League of Women Voters held 4 or 5 forums just simply on the topic of water back around 2018, 2019.
Yes.
3 of them were at the Olympia Center. 1 was at the Yelm Community Center.
And one was at the Lacey Community Center.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
I went
attended?
to the one at the Lacey Community Center.
So I did not make that one, even though I live in Lacey. I made the Yelm one. I made 2 of the Olympia Center ones. They were incredibly well attended. I mean, we're talking over 100 people at each one. There was incredible public interest in the topics. They were amazing quality of content. Like it was mentioned multiple times, these are a lot of experts were speaking on a wide range of topics. They had differing themes for each of the 5 forums. But all of them were water related and a lot of them got into the technical details and aquifers and recharge systems and all sorts of stuff. But I just, A, want to commend that work as Commissioner Kaiser did as well, but B, is there anything from that we've taken and integrated into all of this?
Is that a segue into the next presentation?
Maybe.
I just want to make sure that we tie chapter 9 up with a bow because we do have the rest of the meeting reserved to just talk about the water pieces.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Are there any other questions or comments about other components of chapter 9? As with all the other chapters, this is kind of an 80% draft, really looking for those big shifts that you'd like to see before we clean it up and get ready for the public hearing drafts. So you'll see this again. You'll also see how it's woven into the new climate element here in about 2 months.
Just so double checking on here, because when we talk about protected areas in Thurston County, we do kind of have two very, very different kinds of protected areas in terms of the habitat that we're preserving. There's the prairie and there's the forest. And so I'm looking at the canopy cover stuff. Looking at how we are using preservation techniques to make sure that we increase our overall canopy cover. Okay. And I just want to make sure that we're not we're not I guess double counting protected areas or counting protected areas. That we're not assuming the overall budget that we have for land preservation is just being used for canopy covers, since a lot of it's going to have to go into prairie, which isn't going to be canopy cover, even though it is a different form of carbon sequestration. It counts differently.
The budget for those isn't really reflected in the chapter. It's more of kind of a baseline, like this is what we've achieved so far. It's more background or contextual. I will say that there are different funding streams. If anything, we have more solidified funding for prairie preservation, and we're looking for funding for forest.
Interesting. I would have thought it was the other way around.
No, and then you can add in, protection related to salmon recovery. That's another big one. So a lot of our conservation fund dollars go toward salmon recovery projects historically, or conservation futures dollars. But yeah, actually there's another project that is going to be underway specifically looking at like working with conservation and trying to identify priorities for that, funding for that, really building out the tools in the county's toolkit for land conservation.
Excellent. I just wanted to make sure those weren't running into each other.
No, I will say though, there's been a lot of forest encroachment on our prairie lands. And one of the things that we're exploring with the tree canopy study are, there might be instances where to expand our prairies, you might pull back some of the Doug fir encroachment. We focus on Scotch broom, but the bigger encroachers are actually our Doug fir trees on our historic prairie lands. So.
Stop managing for prairies.
Exactly, it is, those are lands that have been managed.
Since the Pleistocene.
It's just, so I think it'll be really fascinating when you get to see the outputs of the tree canopy study as it's overlaid with all of these other conservation goals, so.
Commissioner Casino.
This might not be the most appropriate place to put it in the comp plan, and I know that at one point it would take some changes in the CIP, but when we're talking about parks and those kind of things, if we had a goal that's at some point we get a playground in the South County, that would be, yes, that would be fantastic. I don't know, if we can't get it through the CIP without making it a goal and comp plan first, I wouldn't mind seeing a goal in the comp plan for having that.
I think ultimately it would fall within the parks plan. And I know there is a goal to start to be more proactive with the parks planning. And I think that's kind of the avenue where you will eventually see that type of project that will end up in a CIP. And in the South County. I know there's limited park space down there, and that's kind of one of the biggest
Playgrounds
hurdles.
aren't big though, so we could probably manage.
Would we then say something along the lines of the county should plan for parks?
I've got good news. We do have a new draft policy specifically to focus on helping to build more opportunities for parks planning. Of the track changes version, I don't know the clean version, I'm sorry, I printed one. It is on page 9-42. It's in the park section. It is pursue opportunities to improve parks and trails administration and planning. And I know that's a huge umbrella policy, but then it can hopefully lead to something in the actual parks plan or CIP.
Can we work the word playground in there somehow? Because parks and playground are not exactly the same thing. So if we could somehow get playground in there, that would make me feel warm and fuzzy.
Something the rest of the commission would like me to look into?
Yes,
I agree.
Yeah, this just goes right into the thing that the very first public comment that we had about having more tiny parks and and short walk public spaces, making that an element of our urban planning. I think that's relevant to this.
Yeah, because it is, we've heard from our folks over at Public Works Box that it's harder to maintain those. We might even entertain a policy that is finding local community partners. I know that that's something that King County did. We spearheaded creating a dog park, and Roads built it, King County Roads, but it was maintained by a local community organization. So it could be a partnership opportunity.
Yeah, South County Tribal Partnership opportunity would be awesome.
And I think that that would be appropriate to live in a comprehensive planning document.
Thank you.
Commissioner Nelson must have read my mind. That was exactly what I was going to suggest.
Who?
Commissioner Nelson. Commissioner. Commissioner Nelson.
One other
Who read your
thing,
mind telepathically?
in response to the first comment, another thing that you'll see coming even further than 2 months down the road, with the transportation element is a look at multimodal levels of service in rural county. Not sure exactly what that's gonna look like yet, sort of what the rural model of that is, but exploring what it means to provide safer biking or pedestrian access on rural roads. I think the biggest hurdle is that a lot of our public works projects are grant funded, and if they're grant funded, they have to meet all the ADA standards, which makes them extremely cost prohibitive versus just a little trail. So we will be looking into some other models, but that'll be a new thing that you'll see in the transportation element.
Thank you. Anything else? Do you have anything you need from us?
Do we have
Confirmation to move forward? Thumbs up.
All right. The thumbs up straw poll.
It's been a great discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Water.
All right, with that, we will move on to work session 14 for again, but this time on water policies and comprehensive plan. With a presentation.
Good evening, Chair Dave, and the Planning Commission. For the record, my name is Brian Benjamin. I'm an associate planner with Community Planning and Economic Development Department, where I work on stream flow restoration implementation. I'm presenting to you tonight an overview of water quantity management policies that are throughout the comprehensive plan. So this is the first chapter where you'll start seeing some water quantity related policy proposals. It won't be the last chapter that you see those proposals in, and we wanted to provide a policy direction context for you as you continue to see water policies throughout the comp plan and prime discussion and feedback based in new policy directions that the staff is exploring. So in today's work session, we'll review background on the comprehensive plan, just a brief overview on what the comp plan already says about water and water quantity. We'll introduce the proposed new policy directions, discuss next steps, and take time for questions. I really want this to be a discussion-based presentation, so feel free to interrupt me with questions as I move through the slide. So our comp plan says a lot about water resources already. It addresses our watershed planning responsibilities under the Watershed Planning Act, Streamflow Restoration Act, Growth Management Act, and responsive to the Hearst decision. It discusses stormwater standards, domestic water availability, natural resource industries, capital improvements and utility provision, natural environment, and more. So I compiled in our memo all of the water quantity related policies throughout the comprehensive plan and embedded our new policy directions in there. And comp plan policies allow exploration of new instruments that may help prepare for changing water futures in Thurston County. So we've got 3 buckets of policies that are really represented in the new proposed policies, that language. The first is to consider lengthening planning horizons for water availability. Currently, we plan on a 20-year planning horizon, and we're introducing language to extend that out so we can start to match climate-driven changes in our water resources with our long-term planning approach, both on mitigating for groundwater abstraction and to accommodate growth on a longer term basis. We're exploring a variety of approaches to water banking. So you'll see water banking policies that relate to agriculture and banking to create offset programs for new permit exempt well installations under the Streamflow Restoration Act. And then we also have policy language to identify and study alternatives to permit exempt drinking water wells. That may be cluster subdivisions, or it may be creating new regulatory standards for permit exempt wells. So right now, under county regulations, you can drill a well anywhere that the Department of Ecology allows you to, and our watershed management plans have language for the county to consider exploring where it may be appropriate to require wells to be drilled to lengths where they're disconnected from aquifers that have surface and groundwater connectivity. So when we're talking about longer planning horizons, we're really talking about supply and demand horizons to evaluate long-term water availability. And this expands the type of projects and eligibility for funding sources that will help improve resiliency to our changing climate. Potential future actions stemming from these policies would be to develop methods and analyses for determining long-term population growth, water demand, and water supply. So if we decide to include this policy language, we would pursue that and pursue implementation of that policy by looking at methodological development and studying where development is going to happen and how it's going to occur over a long-term planning horizon. Water banking would explore bank ideas to serve a variety of functions for diverse interest groups in the county. And the purpose is to allow administration of water rights locally through collaboration in an emergent market for our region. So water rights are a big deal in Eastern Washington, and we have models to look at on how water has been banked by public entities and by commercial entities, and we're starting to see that kind of activity local. TransAlta Water Bank is selling mitigation credits through its bank, and as water becomes a more scarce resource in our communities, we can expect to see different interest groups competing to administer that water, and banking is one of the ways that that it's possible for the county or other groups to administer water. Potential future actions include developing clear goals and user groups for a potential water bank. So we would work with our resource industries, ag, forestry, and development sector to understand who would want to use a bank and how it could be used. Identification of potential seed water rights. So where are water rights that are marketable and eligible to be changed through Department of Ecology's processes located. We would outline the critical path in establishing a bank. So what are the steps and administrative needs for staff if we were to pursue creating a bank? Identify supportive funding. So Ecology has one grant program right now to help fund water banks in headwater areas. But we're not a headwater county, so we're not eligible for that funding source. So participating in development of new funding guidelines for programs that would allow us to pay for initial administrative costs for starting a bank. And then to seek final direction in creating a bank after those steps from the board and the planning commission.
And just really quick, because I know there was a comment from FutureWise that came in. Oh, sorry. Regarding, I think, really those seed water rights, like wanting to ensure that we're not necessarily looking to take water rights from our agricultural operators today and turn them into something else. There are seed water rights that go beyond our agricultural or resource users. And so the intention would not be to undermine our agricultural viability while exploring these water bank ideas. We really want to partner with our ag operators to understand how this tool could help serve their needs in a changing climate.
Commissioner Bartlett, did you have? You covered actually the primary point I wanted to make. So thank you for that. Just so that I understand this a little bit better. When we're talking about these water banks, that's largely a way of collaborating water stewardship within a set group of people, as opposed to something that would be more like, I don't know, a carbon credit scheme or something like that, where you're looking at essentially guaranteeing that the damage is done, but just distributing it differently. Which is a great way to make money, but not necessarily a great way to store carbon. And so I'm just making sure that we're not looking at a way that we're looking at something that is actually about enhancing and preserving our water resources rather than just differently spending them.
Yeah. Sorry, just a quick response is there are a lot of ways to operate a bank and they all require water that's put in trust through that bank to be used for beneficial purposes. And it would be the direction of the board or whatever water resource advisory committee or administrative framework generally that controlled that water bank to define what its idea of beneficial use is.
So this is really a water rights bank, not a water bank. And it's the county that's going to hold the water rights to everything and then divvy them out is the idea.
It doesn't have to be, and that's where this language of exploring alternatives is. It may be that our water user groups are uncomfortable with the idea of the county controlling water rights. Right, so we're not proposing a direction on how it would be administered, but that this is a tool in the toolkit that the communities can use to shore up legal security and actual wet water availability and to protect water from reductions in that may come down the pipeline from Department of Ecology in the future with the climate change regime, right? So
local control, essentially. What we're proposing is to add policies to the comp plan that that provide a framework for the county to have more local control over how water is used in the future.
Tells you how Byzantine the policy is when you have to qualify your water as wet water, but. Commissioner Bartlett.
So many questions I have about this. Okay. I have no idea how the county could do any type of management of water, and they can't do it right now. Is Kevin gonna come and talk to us about this?
He is, so to the number one point that was identified here, it wasn't necessarily regional, but intergovernmental approach.
Yeah.
Everything that Brian is sharing has been vetted with multiple different water related staff at the county. So Kevin Hansen's been instrumental and part of most of the conversations. Kevin Jensen, our new ag program manager, has been at the table. We've engaged environmental health, public works. We've got Larry. So
I
yeah,
guess
I mean, trying
just
to meet all
looking
those
at the
ideas.
whole concept of water banking, regardless of what you're talking about, unless you have a reservoir that's getting stormwater runoff. And you're banking that water for later use in agriculture or human sources. Everything else that comes down goes into the ground in the aquifer, or it's used up where it drops. So I'm kind of not understanding the whole concept of purchasing water and water banking water. Particularly in this county, we have no, like we said, we have no headwaters. We really don't have any reservoirs. There's some that could be made, but then you would take up prairie land most likely and some other agricultural lands. Commissioner Bartlett, I don't know.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so from what I understand, I think I have a little bit of an answer to that, but it's also just, I want to make sure I'm understanding this idea correctly. So it works a little bit like a land trust or a co-op in that you are essentially, there are different groups that can use a certain amount of water over the course of a year. And if they don't use it up, they may or may not get the same water access later on. So in a lot of cases, you have people using, or entities using their water, not necessarily the way that they would, that best benefits them, but that ensures that they have access to that water in the future. And this would be a way for them to use their water rights and swap it between each other so that they don't lose access to their water, but that water is being used at the time and place that it's needed throughout that cooperative.
The only way you can do that is through reservoirs or aqueducts or some other type of thing.
This is just the right to the water. not the
Just
idea
the
of
right
rights.
to it.
This is, so I can give you an example. Is, so in ecology gives out water rights for irrigation, right? I have X number of acre feet of water on each, whatever parcel I have irrigation on. Technically, if I don't use it, ecology can take it back. In reality, they don't usually do that unless it's really obvious. What water banking can do is I can put, say I've got 10 acre feet on this piece here. I can put 2 or 3 feet in the bank and now only use 7 or 8 feet and not be in danger of losing that. And the bank can, if there's somebody that's interested, at least in my case, on a river, transfer it downstream.
Yeah, this is,
So
to me,
it's,
this is.
I mean, it's,
It's just ridiculous.
Well, I think one of the problem I see with it is there's gonna be a huge latecomer penalty.
Yeah.
So the people that already have water rights are gonna come out fantastic, and anybody that wants to do something later on is gonna have to go begging for somebody else's water rights.
Yeah,
And when maybe the work around that is the deep wells to go to a different aquifer, that would help some development there. But this is really going to entrench those that already have, and those that don't are really gonna have a uphill battle to get.
I don't think it's gonna be that way.
Yeah,
I think this is.
This will formalize it though.
It's already
But-
formalized with prior appropriation water rights.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is, if you're building a house, you aren't gonna buy water from me. It's very unlikely, but I mean, the way it is now, if you want water. And I can tell you, You know, you talked about Ronnie Smith's farm, Lot in Olympia. And this is one of the things I'd like to see added. Lot in Olympia came and bought his farm and the water rights and turned them into Olympia's water rights.
Yeah, you're talking about the Jensen farm,
No, Smith.
Smith farm,
Yeah.
Ronnie Smith's farm, yeah.
And so I mean, since we're talking about water, I would like to see a policy in here that Thurston County will not use its funds or resources to eliminate agricultural water rights. Because I will say, they've also come to us with the city of Tumwater.
Yeah.
And, you know, the way and this is the really bad part for me. The way it worked was they said, well, we want to buy your water rights, but and we're gonna buy everything and you can still farm it. But then we've already bought 40 acres right next to you. We're going to bring that water and pump it back into the aquifer. Like, well, okay. Well, but next thing we're gonna do is that's gonna raise the water table and you're gonna have more wetlands.
Yeah.
So you can't farm that. Well, what do you mean? Well, and then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna do restoration. So really what they're talking about is, you know, buying my water rights and taking my farm.
Yeah, that's what they did with Ronnie Smith's farm.
That's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And that's why I knew what was happening as soon as they showed up.
Yeah, they bought 100
And-
acres right along the Deschutes River and turned it in, they restored it to basically a wetland area instead of agricultural land.
And that's long-term ag ground too.
It is.
Let's make sure we know that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's,
So with the so we heard FutureWise say, don't convert ag water into residential water. Would the solution be, don't convert ag water into any other water?
no, I think I don't wanna say don't. What I wanna say is the county should not use its funds and resources to do that, because keep in mind, the difference between me selling water to you because you want it and me selling water to, say, Tumwater or Olympia because they want it is, I don't know if they probably don't have any jurisdiction on me, but Thurston County has eminent domain.
Correct.
So they can come and just flat out take it if they want.
Violate their own policies for agricultural rural growth.
Yeah.
Mr. Bartlett.
I mean, obviously, you did not present this as the only solution that will work for stuff. You presented it as one of a set of tools. As such, I do see a lot of potential in this. Specifically, we've talked a lot about the limits to our powers here and the limits to our implementation. This is a really good tool, it sounds like, to give water rights owners a certain amount of control over their collective water. It's a sort of form of collective bargaining in a way. It's like I said, it's a little bit of a water co-op. And as such, it would let you collectively prevent certain types of these kinds of purchases from happening, because you as a member of the water board would be setting your water sales policies. As such, I see it as something that is a useful tool. I appreciate it being brought up. I'm looking forward to some of the other options that we have coming up.
I think we should remember also that this is a explore. Water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are so many steps. I mean, just in that initial exploration, we have faced a lot of challenges. And so it'll take really creative solutions. I think what we're looking for is just that space to apply for grant funds, to go after funding, to further explore and refine what these ideas are. And as Brian mentioned, we're not necessarily even saying that this is a bank that we're creating, but we have a lot of we have a strong administrative foundation that could be a good launching off point to support the ag industry if they wanted to explore like a cooperative structure, which we have found a few in California that have done that. But it's like, how do we leverage all the resources we have at the county to support it? Knowing that we think it's probably best if it's led and administered by the actual beneficiaries of it.
And just to kind of, part of what we're trying to do is introduce these policy directions and follow up with information that's going to be helpful for you to interpret these policies moving through the rest of the plan. And if it's helpful to provide case study examples of banks, of water banks that serve a variety of interests and user groups, banks that are designed to support agriculture, that are led by farmers and water districts and irrigation districts, and how banks can operate in a way that supports resource industries, and how other banks can be designed to meet streamflow restoration requirements by creating offset banks that new development can purchase into. We would be happy to outline case studies of banks that function both under county operation and non-governmental operation as well, and to help you understand what we mean.
Commissioner Bartley?
Yeah, I guess just to piggyback a little bit off of something that you were saying earlier, Commissioner Nelson was saying earlier, when we're talking about water rights, when we're talking about this water prioritization is what this ends up coming down to. We're sort of prefiguring a lot of the water prioritization that comes later. I think that a really good framework is like, what is the basis that we're going to need to like be sustaining out here? So that's our ecosystem resources, the things that keep our forests and our wetlands alive, our agriculture and our housing, and then our commercial opportunities after that, because there's no commercial opportunities if we can't live here or feed ourselves. So when we're looking at how we're prioritizing this, that's something I would really love for the staff to keep in mind, is that we're prioritizing our agriculture and our housing as not opposed, but as the two aspects of what we need to keep things going. Below ecosystem services. Because you can't live somewhere that not survivable.
In the same vein of these conversations, I feel like the writing things we're talking around, but not directly at, is the future of water and the shortage, the scarcity of the resource. It's in some ways considered the scarcest resource on earth. Everyone's familiar with previous commentary about things like the future wars won't be fought over oil, they'll be fought over water. We've seen a huge amount of capital, large scale capital money buying water rights. Is there anything we can do at the county level to protect ourselves from scenarios where water becomes so easily commoditized that it becomes available to the highest bidder, that we lose out on our community resources to outside capital?
I think the fastest answer is that water banking is one of the ways that you could do that. You enroll water rights for public benefit into a portfolio of rights that are then maintained for public benefit in perpetuity. So it prevents the monetization of water through corporate and capital interest. Not that it doesn't necessarily prevent it, but it competes with that force. And there may be preference in our community water users to have that water enrolled in a portfolio that is managed for public interest rather than monetary gain.
To back onto Commissioner Halverson's comments over there. I don't know if we could do this in a planning document, but to kind of go on what Mr. Commissioner Pessinger was saying, is can we make it, if we had a water bank and that public good was that it stays in Thurston County, that our water doesn't get shipped out, that somebody doesn't come in, buy up water rights and send them down to Sacramento?
Yeah, you would, through enrollment in the bank, you can define or redefine through change processes, the geographic extent that the water can serve. You know, there's some pretty heavy restrictions already on where water can go and whether it can even be taken out of subbasins.
Well,
let alone
in
distributed.
Washington State, you're right, it can't be taken out of subbasins. It has to be like the Deschutes River. If it's the Deschutes River watershed, you can only get water rights if you're within the Deschutes River watershed. Yelm found that out because they bought into the Ronnie Smith farm and found out that they were in the Nisqually River watershed instead of the Deschutes River watershed. They lost hundreds, well, not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but a lot of money because they're still invested in that with 3 other cities. They had to find another way to get their water rights to grow the community of Yelm. So in Washington State, it's, like you said, it's based on the basin, where the water's coming down, Nisqually or Deschutes in our cases.
Yeah, so water use has to stay in basin under state statute and mitigation for consumptive use of water has to occur in basin and in place, in time and in kind. So under the Foster decision criteria, mitigation and use of water is already heavily restricted. But to your point, the bank can further define how that water is used and create flexibility also where state statute is relatively restrictive. So it's both sides. It can create flexibility and it can create specificity.
Just a thought, it sounds like the state law is decent at restricting water use to the basins. That's the kind of regulation that I think sets a decent floor that if we can, might make sense to replicate in our planning and in our rules so that if that ever changed or loosened up at the state level, at least at the local level, we would still have that same level of protection. Just worth putting out there.
So just curiosity to follow on to that, like that Swire Coca-Cola deal. I mean, how are they gonna constrain the water being put in bottles and shipped outside of the basin?
As long as it's obtained in the basin, it's just like the Olympia Brewing Company. Bottled in the basin, shipped all over the United States.
Mr. Barber.
The future is bottled.
I just, you'd use the phrase for public benefit, and I just wanted some clarification of what it meant in this context.
That's very important, yeah.
Yeah. State statute is relatively loose on how it defines beneficial use of water. And the short answer is when water is administered through this kind of framework where you have a requirement for putting the water to beneficial use and for public interest as a common, the administrative body defines what its priorities are for beneficial use. So this is where the explore language comes in, where we work with water users in Thurston County to define what beneficial use of a bank means. And that we are, not being prescriptive on how that's defined. So that doesn't really answer your question, but.
So, yeah, beneficial use is the use that we decide is beneficial.
The administrative body decides.
The administrative body, yes. But yes, the general we, the royal we.
The royal we, that does not include us.
Do we need the record to reflect that Barry's wearing a skeptical face?
Let the record show. So I just want to come up with 2 more ideas for reasons for water banking. As far as like what I'm most concerned about is irrigation. If something were to happen to me and I could not, maybe I end up in a wheelchair or, maybe something else happens and I can't water. If there is a water bank, I can put that water in the bank and it's protected. The other idea that I'm thinking of is Washington state law, where your water is as long as you use it. If you can come up with a better way to use it and conserve water, then you can put what you're not using in a bank and still have it protected.
Yeah.
Whereas, not that there's anything out there that's that much greater that it's gonna make a difference in my operation right now. But, the thing I think of is if somebody just next week came up with this great new water conservation effort where I could grow crops just like I do with, and cut 20% of my water out. It's gotta be really cheap because I don't have any incentive to do that, because at some point, if the if Department of Ecology finds out, they can come say, well, you're not using all your water, so we're gonna take it back. So that's another thing where, from my perspective, I see water banking as a good idea.
We've heard that from the conservation district, that there are a lot of state programs for irrigation upgrades. But there's a caveat that once they're put in, there's monitoring and any excess water will be reappropriated. And so we have ag operators who are, rightfully a little bit nervous about taking advantage of these programs and, and these irrigation efficiencies. So, but at a more local level, if we had a water bank, there'd be that flexibility potentially to share it with your neighbor. And so it's still going to an ag use. It's expanding the amount of irrigated ground that we might have in the county. So.
If I could ask Scott a question, it might be a little bit off, but what happens if a fellow like you that has a farm and has water rights to it decides they don't want to be a farmer anymore and wants to do residential development? Do you think that water should be able to be used by those residential homes?
Yes, I think it's probably, it depends on the water right, really, because there's so much variation in how much water you have for each acre. I think there are places where I could convert water rights to residential use and still have water rights left over. My other thought on that, at least in that particular scenario, is that you're reducing the amount of land to put that water on anyways. So it's not needed as much, If I've got a 50-acre parcel and I'm farming the whole thing, and I've got enough water to do that, and I still off 20 acres, I've got excess water. So I'm either gonna have to bank it or more than likely sell it. And might as well sell it to the local development that is going in.
If there wasn't a restriction to convert ag water to residential water. All right, thank you.
Mr. Messenger.
The reason I asked questions earlier about reservoirs is that I'm a little curious about the overlap of the dual benefits of both water storage reservoirs as well as the energy storage capacities. As we try to transition to more sustainable energy models, one of the biggest issues I continue to hear about in almost all models of sustainable energy is the storage element. Anybody that knows anything about solar knows that the big problem is the batteries, and where do you put all the batteries and how much do they weigh and what facilities can handle them and how much can they hold and for how long and all of that. And it's been pointed out to me that reservoirs in and of themselves, if they're connected to hydroelectric or other things, that they're a form of storage of energy. And that in fact, at times when you have excess energy in other areas, which is often the case, times of excess and times of shortage, that you could possibly even use that energy to pump the water back up the hill and have it be used again later. But my point is, I guess, simply a question of, are we doing anything at the county level to look at any opportunities for the dual benefits of both water storage and energy storage?
Yeah, I think, the hydroelectric question is challenging because you're usually talking about dams. There are other types of galleries that are sort of emerging in hydroelectric power, sort of underwater turbines and that kind of thing. But, the status quo and the tried and true option is dams. And that is a very tense conversation. I know that there, in the Chehalis Basin, through ecology's work under the Chehalis Basin strategy, there are conversations about flood control dams in the Chehalis Basin, different than hydroelectric. But of course, one of the benefits of having flood control structures is that you store water in the upper basin. Other project types for water storage that are identified in our watershed plans include upland forestry management. Forests, as they age, store water, and you can impose on top of that different harvest and cut techniques to enhance water storage in our upper basins. And it is, to my knowledge, the only storage approach that gets better as it ages. As the trees get older, they store more water and they just appear to keep doing that as they get older. So old trees hold water in our uplands, and our watershed plans call for it. And our staff and other entities that implement our watershed plans are looking at upland storage through forestry management as project types to meet stream flow restoration activities and requirements.
That's excellent to hear about. Thank you. To clarify, I'm not a fan of damming rivers or anything like that. I just, climate change is clearly changing our snowpack models, and that's been our historical method of having water available to us in higher quantities, and it's likely to continue to get worse and worse. So it seems those types of things have some potential for it. And geography obviously makes a difference. Lewis County seems much better suited, both because that's where they want to do energy production, including small scale nuclear, but also because of the elevations and the flooding of the river basin and Chehalis and all of that. They've got water where they don't want it, and they've got water where they need it, but they don't have it. And they've got elevation changes much more significant than what we have here in Thurston County. So maybe, coordinating with them on some things is also a more regional strategy that we have.
I'd like to mention another type of water storage that staff are currently working on here. We have a Department of Ecology funded Stream Flow Restoration Act grant for off-channel storage along the Deschutes that would divert surface waters from the Deschutes River during our high flow seasons and allow that water to spill over into a wetland gallery and to infiltrate or to stay as surface water into the summer months. That project's just in feasibility study stages, but it's a very important and large project. It's the largest project for the Deschutes watershed restoration plan.
And that one is in partnership with the tribe, the conservation district, one of the ecosystems. So I know it's not regional, but in terms of bringing a lot of partners to the table and trying to achieve a balance of all of these multiple benefits. I will say we are gonna go we hope take a tour at the end of the month. If planning commissioners wanted to join us and learn more about that project, it'd be a really neat opportunity to see what we're trying to do on the ground. And it's not the kind of stuff that comes before the planning commission traditionally. So we could send you some details on that. And
The Deschutes River watershed?
Okay, can you, because this is just so cool, share what Nisqually Community Forest is doing for snowpack?
Yeah, Nisqually Community Forest operates snowpack experimentation studies, so they have mixed species stands, mixed age stands, and also clearings to experiment with holding snow longer as our freezing elevations change and we get higher. The Nisqually main stem system is Thurston County's only snowpack driven system. So we have the kind of fortune by virtue of our geography to be able to focus on rainwater storage as a way to keep water in our system, which is potentially a more manageable environmental hurdle to jump than keeping snow where it has challenges freezing and staying frozen. So yeah, we're largely rainwater driven system, and also unfortunately by virtue of our geography, a lot of our aquifers are very transmissive. So groundwater storage of rainwater can be difficult throughout, and particularly the Chehalis Basin is very transmissive. So infiltration and keeping water in the ground as a form of storage takes a lot of engineering, but it's still possible.
Thank you. You spoke to one of the things I was gonna ask about, which was overflow. Because it seems like that's the most obvious answer to wanting to store water over the long term without damming rivers. That seems like it might have something that we could work with in terms of reservoirs, even for power storage, if we're talking about overflow in areas that don't involve damming rivers. So that's interesting. I also really like, and I wanna focus more on upland, like both existing upland, like older growth forests, or longer or older forests, and like both preserving the ones that exist and creating more, basically. There's a lot of whenever you're looking around this area, you see a lot of clear cuts in areas that would otherwise be water storage. And that's something that always strikes me when I see it. And it's the one thing that actually increases for now with climate change is that those forests are moving up. So the more preservation that we can do of this technique of maintaining forests as a water reservoir, that's one thing that we can actually guarantee. So I really appreciate that you brought that up. I would like to look more at reservoirs as basically ecosystem batteries.
Trees is ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we're currently working with our partners, specifically in the Nisqually watershed, at grant opportunities to expand the Nisqually community forest. So it's outside of Thurston County, but it's important. The watershed, of course, spans both. So that is one of the regional solutions that we're looking at right now.
What does Pierce County say about
It's early to say in our first presentation of here's a grant opportunity, are you interested? The answer was yes, we're interested. Yes,
We
we're
wouldn't
interested.
own it.
Yep.
We wouldn't own it. It was more just like I think the way we need to approach the regional problems, or the way we are, is who just has capacity at this given moment to go after this grant, to write it and put in that time and energy for a few months. And so this time it might be
about the
us.
Nisqually River watershed?
Yeah, and next time it might be Pierce County, or if we're partnering with Lewis County, it's like we just put in a stream flow restoration grant to purchase Skookumchuck water rights that are Skookumchuck Dam. I did not use the right terminology.
It's a reservoir.
That would benefit the whole watershed. So letting Lewis County and Grays Harbor County know, but not just taking this like only Thurston County approach that it's gonna take regional problem solving if we're gonna tackle our water quality issues.
I want to go back to something you said, Commissioner Bartlett, and that was around deforestation and clear cutting. Most of what I see in the area is on privately owned forest lands. And what measures are available to us is a planning commission to affect or impact that deforestation?
Zero for the county.
Unless there are policies that encourage the county to look at purchasing forest lands. Or creating things like, I mean, I know it was in the carbon sequestration white paper, looking at the community forest model and expanding it. It's a really successful model, only 2 of them that I know of exist in the state. But why not build off of that success?
There's huge swaths above the county park out. Just.
Yeah,
Right to the
all
ground.
warehouse.
Yeah. I wasn't gonna name names, but since you mentioned them.
Yeah.
It seems like that goes so naturally into the water banking conversation now. Like that's where that can go, is you have an incentive to purchase that land that's going to create water reservations. If you can keep it as a forest and use it in that way.
There is one item from this long table about the county purchasing forests. It says, some mature forest stands should be purchased in metropolitan fringe areas of the county for their historic and aesthetic values for parks and other recreational uses, unless they are designated as forest lands of long-term commercial significance.
Not the same thing.
Not the same thing, but it is the county saying one of our goals is to purchase forests. That is stated for aesthetic reasons, but if we're already saying we're down to purchase it, and if someone's just clear cutting it to sell the wood, if we can give them a similar amount of money and save it as a permanent water battery, then why wouldn't we do that?
But
I'm just
rights to the trees for 40 years, let them grow for another 40.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, we have existing goals in our plans to purchase trees, so it's not unrealistic to suggest that we do that for a different reason.
But you make a good point, Commissioner Day, and that they see that as a crop renewable. And so I think you have to somehow account for that longevity.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, you can like basically pay people to change rotation schedules and whatnot too. So.
Yeah, there are other mechanisms to influence. But I do think if the planning commission wants us to look into those, it's the comprehensive plan is the appropriate policy document to set those intentions or establish those intentions.
I think we have a lot of interest in preserving trees for
Yes, a lot of
multitude
intentions.
reasons.
A lot of intentions.
Well, yeah, specifically, we should be looking at this acquisition, specifically in the context of water retention, right? Like, that was not mentioned anywhere within the stated reasons except for implicitly, but it would be really great if it were. As
example
of
us saying we want some goal.
Is there a threatened or endangered species that we could piggyback that into the HCP to steal up some land?
Similarly, I was wondering if there's some way that the county could benefit from tariffs on trees that were exported.
Are you trying to teach pocket gophers how to swim?
Trees.
Climb trees.
Some trees.
I mean,
We have both
start
Chinook and
identifying squirrels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking go for it.
Unironically, yes, we have Chinook and steelhead, we have the frogs, we have marbled murrelets, we have spotted owls, all of them
Butterfly.
require, was that?
Butterflies.
Yeah, and butterflies, all of them require habitats that are good at soaking in water. So-
There are definitely water nexuses with all of our habitat conservation. Okay, well, you do have a few more slides.
Sorry, we stopped you right on the.
No?
No, it's
We've
okay.
never done that. What? Wasn't a pattern that we were.
Yeah, and we can always come back to water banking. We just have one more policy direction.
Staff should remember that pattern, but the most important thing to get feedback on up first. But go ahead.
So this policy direction is alternatives to permanent exempt well regulations than what we have today. And we would explore different development standards or development types to replace current practices for permanent exempt wells. So the purpose of this policy or these policies would be to create new programs, development standards, and then to qualify for new funding mechanisms to support our first decision, stream flow restoration based planning. Potential future actions would be development of incentive programs for alternatives to permanent exempt wells. So how can we create situations where property owners might benefit from opting into drilling their wells deeper in the aquifers that are disconnected from surface waters, then exploring development standards for permanent exempt wells where appropriate. Our Nisqually watershed plan asks the county to consider development regulations in RIA 11 to require wells be drilled deeper, for example, and then to define funding mechanisms for offset requirements under Stream Flow Restoration Act. One of the actions that piece of legislation allows counties to do is to establish permit fees to fund its stream flow restoration planning. So we could develop different options of how to apply permit fees so that we could start to develop a budget for this work that's not dependent on, a grant opportunity that comes from Department of Ecology once every 2 years. Being able to act on issues as they emerge rather than waiting for grant cycles is an important capability for this type of planning. So again, defining funding mechanisms to meet our offset requirements under Stream Flow Restoration Act through permit fees, other types of funding structures.
Commissioner Bartlett?
Maybe this is just profound ignorance, and I know it is, so I apologize in advance, but do we want to be drilling wells deeper? I mean, doesn't that like drain out isn't that like preventing or wetlands from being able to form as easily, and doesn't that just sort of get into a fossil water source?
Yeah, so it really depends on the aquifer, and that's where we have feasibility analysis requirements to ensure that this approach would be appropriate for specific geographies in the county. So we would review, for instance, in the Nisqually plan, when that planning unit convened to define projects that would restore in-stream flows, the concept was that there are healthy aquifers that are readily replenished deeper, that are disconnected from surface waters, meaning the groundwater doesn't flow into the river, and that by drilling from the deeper aquifer, theoretically, you would be feeding the upper aquifer that had groundwater connectivity. So you'd be drilling water from deep, assuming that it replaces healthfully, so that water isn't being drawn down and you're not creating a deficit in that aquifer supply, and you're bringing that water up through the home and through the septic system into the upper confined aquifer and feeding stream flow. So there are specific hydrologic contexts where you may create a benefit to in-stream flows and aquifers that feed into rivers and wetlands, et cetera, rather than creating a deficit. So it requires extensive study to determine whether those actions are possible and actually will create the benefit that you hope it will. And this is a policy that would support us in pursuing funding to do that kind of analysis.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Passenger?
So the Hearst decision, 2016, Whatcom County, it basically, correct me if I'm wrong, it basically says counties have to handle things differently in how they issue permits. Basically, you have to know you have water before you can issue permits. Is that correct? Summary?
Yeah.
Sort of.
It defined more clearly what the responsibility for determining water availability was, and also created legislation that set numeric offset requirements for specific watersheds in Washington state to meet. All of Thurston County's watersheds have those minimum requirements. There is no maximum requirement, so you can go beyond what the legislative minimum offset is. But the idea is that there is some consumptive use generated by any permit exempt well, that there is a methodology that was developed to quantify what that consumptive use was. It's about a quarter acre per year. And that we would project into the future over a 20-year time horizon and say, okay, we can account roughly that we'll have a deficit of the Chehalis Basin is about 505 acre feet per year into 2040.
So it's kind of like having a no net loss policy that actually has teeth and enforcement.
Yep. Yeah, so we're required to meet those minimum thresholds by the end of the planning horizon.
You know, so I'm just curious, 2016, I remember it was a huge topic at the 2019 water forums that we were previously referenced. A lot of hand wringing, a lot of people freaking out that it's gonna be the end of all sorts of development and cause huge problems and spiral our housing costs and all these other things. In your perspective, over the last 5 years, what has actually happened from it? What's been the impact of it?
Well, we had our watershed planning units that were established in the early 2000s under RCW 9082. There's a Watershed Planning Act, reconvene, define specific projects that the implementing jurisdictions participating in those planning units would be responsible for doing at the end of 20 years. The outcomes have been kind of diverse across the state, and I think an emerging feeling across Western Washington after implementation of that legislation is that it was underfunded. You have to go on a competitive basis to get funding to implement the projects that were identified under that plan. That said, there has been success and projects have been pursued and implemented, and we have currently 3 projects in the works under the stream flow restoration grant. So yeah, I mean, it's creating benefit, it's slow to change. There's some feeling that it's gonna be really hard to meet minimum standards across the state, but jurisdictions are making progress.
I remember the biggest concern here locally in Thurston County was Yelm specifically. Had large housing development plans and lack of access to water, and they already referenced some of their boondoggles on that front.
Well, they bought the Tahoma Valley Golf Course.
Oh.
And they used the water rights for the golf course for the development, and they made the golf course purple pipe.
You mentioned in Thurston County, we're at the minimum levels, we're okay. What's your perspective on what happened with Yelm?
I'm not entirely familiar with what happened with Yelm specifically in a broader context. I think those kinds of solutions are going to become more competitive over time. The type of water right and those kinds of solutions are going to be vied for by all of the regional governments. And I didn't mean to suggest that Thurston County has met its minimum requirements.
Okay.
The watersheds across the board have not. So we have a lot of work to do to meet that. And I think part of the reality too is I think municipal governments are turning to counties to solve the issue of permanent exempt wells, which are a form of rural development. So there's an idea, even though the legislation suggests that we're jointly responsible for implementing that, this is rural development driving this, and that counties are primarily responsible for finding the solutions and funding the project.
I would just like to point out, this is all the more reason to get these cities to start incorporating instead of trying to push their density off on us. But you've probably heard this from me before.
On this we agree. On this we agree.
Any questions on these alternative solutions to permanent exempt wells? Just brief overview of ways to engage for anyone online listening. You can visit the Thurston 2045 webpage, sign up for email updates, and comment on our Thurston 2045 project. And then if you have comments specifically about this water resource approach. Just specify that in the comment. And that's all, open for discussion. We can revisit slides on policy approaches, or we can look at our memo and discuss policy language if it's desirable.
Just as a time check for folks, we're about a minute away from this agenda item, but we have more to talk about.
I have one thing.
Go for it.
So, I'm kind of a stickler for language sometimes. And there's a lot of terms in here that may very well be defined somewhere else, but I see use of words like major, minor, significant, some, throughout a lot of these, like, and if we don't have that defined somewhere, then not only is it couched in a should, but it's also really vague. Like the one I gave the example, and we should purchase some trees for aesthetic purposes. That's great, but is some trees 2 trees? Cause like, I feel like if this is aspirational to begin with, at a minimum, we could say, we'll purchase at a minimum X acres of trees for it. We're at least setting like what our bottom threshold is, because we're not gonna be on this commission forever. And other people are going to have to look at it and interpret what we're saying. And when we're looking at our goals, we're gonna be looking at, well, what do they mean when they said that? I feel like we should, if this is aspirational or if this is guided, then we should make an effort to add less squishy words, qualitative and quantitative to these. That's just my little piece.
I'd like hard targets.
Agreed.
I'm taking notes because they're, unlike other prior comp plans, there will be an implementation plan in the appendix. And so that might be where we put those harder targets, and we even have goals set over the 20-year timeframe. And have that specificity spelled out.
This table is spectacular, by the way.
It's better on a tablet because you can search for particular words.
I can.
What I heard is exploring adding policies around forest stewardship or forest management for hydrological benefits. And I'm not sure how this would be approached, but the prioritization framework for ecosystem services, which I think you mentioned, Commissioner Bartlett, or like having it referenced in some way. And then from Commissioner Nelson, making it clear that county funds and resources shouldn't be used to purchase ag water rights in the same way that, you know, we're seeing our municipalities purchasing farms for the water rights.
Well, I think it's to purchase ag water rights and
For
change
non-ag
the-
use.
For
non-ag
non-ag
use.
use.
Thank you. And then looking at reservoirs, water reservoirs that would serve dual benefits for energy storage, and whether there's some merit in exploring that further. In the partnership with our South
With
County.
the prioritization thing you mentioned, the thing related to water banking and how we protect from commercialization.
That was one aspect of it, was when we're talking about what our water priorities are here. We have ecosystem services mentioned within that. I mean, that also comes into when we're talking about land purchases, right? Like that we're talking about, since so many of these things stack.
Yeah, and I think that also gets embedded in the stream flow restoration piece. So
Maybe add something about water for public benefit.
Well-defined public benefit.
Yes.
the planning commission should be consulted when this came out.
Daniel, what we meant.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, moving on, we have our next agenda item is general Thurston 2045 update.
Yeah, so we are really starting to dig in on housing and climate related stuff. So as was mentioned in the public comment, we went to the Local Good Governance Coalition last week and were able to hear from a number of different organizations that coalition represents as it relates to climate. So we're excited to get that feedback. We're also having our consultant do these mini like focus groups across all of the different departments within the county that work on climate and or housing related issues. So we just kicked off one of those housing focus groups today where we brought in our regional housing council and environmental health and basically different implementers of these programs so that we're not missing anything. And then as we mentioned and then sent out, we've got our upcoming community forums. We've been busy planning those and trying to ensure that they're interactive. That if we have a board, you should be able to engage with that board and give the county information for the planning commission and the board to consider. So yeah, and you'll see more events popping up because we are entering outreach season, and so Miriam's been busy.
So you just mentioned the Good Governance Coalition and meetings and conversations with them. This is something you and multiple planning staff are involved with?
Yeah, so we've been to them now twice. We provided an open invitation that we'd be happy to come on a quarterly basis. And so we've just tried to schedule it where we're at a place where their feedback can be integrated in a timely fashion. So this last one was climate. And then we're gonna be we don't really present, we're really there to just listen. So they know the topic we're coming to learn about. And then we basically are just there taking notes. So we had our climate consultant there last week. And then the next one will be housing. So we'll be sure to have the housing consultant there to listen.
Well, I guess I think this is great. I love that there's good engagement and community input. I'm curious because I feel like it slightly means that we get a little bit less public comment here from those same folks, because they've already shared their word, shared their ideas. And so I'm just curious if there's any way you all could summarize some of what you got from them and attach it with public comments for us.
I was asking them throughout the meeting to go ahead and send me their comments. And those who did send that to me, I went ahead and put into our survey.
Okay.
Yeah, I noticed there was a little bit of crossover.
Yeah, and the comments are inputted by chapter. And so those ones would be under the climate chapter, which of course touches all of the different chapters of the comp plan. But yes, that is a really good point. At the end of the meeting, we also, because it's hard to talk about climate related issues and not touch on more urban solutions or concerns. And so a lot of the ideas that were shared, the cities need to hear. So we asked if either we could share feedback or we really said the coalition should invite the cities to the table as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
It's been great.
Anything else on 2045 update?
No, I mean, just happy to answer questions. Just one last thing. We had a really good follow-up meeting with the consultant, specifically talking about how to address the planning commission's request for having data broken out. Because the consultant is mostly relying on census block data, it's hard to get that refinement of city, UGA, rural. But what we thought was a good solution, and hopefully you agree, was to generate more of those like heat maps. And I assured the consultant that this is a very savvy group that can look at a heat map and where our populations are. And so as it relates to things like different age groups and other like the demographic info. So anyway, more to come, but we will be seeing a number of additional map products or data analysis products for you to consider when you're looking at housing.
Commissioner Kaiser.
Thank you. I'm excited for this work and especially for the public outreach component. And I think we've been really wise to spend a lot of time thinking about language here, really commenting and digging deep on it. Something else we might want to think about is logo in the graphic language. And I have to confess, I've always been troubled when I see the Thurston 2045 logo. You see a taxi cab and a bus, which I guess means transportation. You see a skyscraper and a little building. And then you see a profile of a plant that is absolutely not native to our region.
Pond of some sort.
It looks so generic. It looks like, I don't know who created it, but it doesn't speak to our sense of place. I mean, I'm sorry, how many taxis do you see in Thurston County? Even in the most urbanized parts, it's a rare sight. And I would love to see us have something a little more with a sense of place. And I think it would be helpful for, community outreach for when people come in and they look at material, they see things that they identify with, whether it's the silhouette of a Western red cedar, whether it's a bike or a pickup truck, just something that was less generic and more about where we are.
Yeah, it's a little less clip art, maybe.
Like that picture of the gopher.
That could be the mascot.
Gopher is awesome. It's local.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bombard, aren't you the master of icons?
I could, no, I could make something better than this. I'm just, yeah.
So Commissioner Kaiser, it was interesting you brought up the plant one. I have always looked at it and thought it was a fern, but
Yeah,
now
I
that
thought
you
it was
bring
a
it
fern
up.
too.
It looks like a palm frond.
It could be some kind of ash. And I was trying to give it the benefit of the doubt. Like, what
Ash.
species of ash could that be? And I'm like, no,
Could be Oregon grape.
We
I
will,
haven't seen a prickles on
heard,
that.
we will relay that.
So, yeah,
I
I
do
do,
love the taxis.
I do like the way it's divvied up. I do like the general idea of it. I do like the tweak idea. The tweaking it's good. Actually, I had a question about heat maps. So when just to clarify, when you're talking about providing heat maps, it's heat maps of responses that we are then going to use our collective wisdom to map onto what the population densities are.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, heat map might not have been the best example, but they did this for some of the demographic data. But it's like, if you're looking at just age, because one of the questions was like, okay, so we have a higher than average population that's 65 and over. It's difficult for them to break down those numbers of like, is that rural, UGA, city in like a table form, but they can display it census blocks, different shades across Thurston County. So you could see like, oh, actually, this census block in downtown Olympia has a much higher number of people over 65. Meanwhile, Yelm is like super young and hip. So it's just a visualization rather than a breakout in tabular format. So
Just don't use a red green spectrum.
no.
Blue green is nice.
All right. Anything else on 2045 before we move on to staff update? All right, moving on to staff update.
Oh, you already heard Miriam, their new senior planner, which means we have an opening for an education and outreach specialist, which we're very excited about. And that should get posted in the next week or two.
Miriam left, is that what I heard?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Miriam is our new senior planner.
Oh.
So we have elevated community engagement into a leadership role within community planning. Which, yeah, I'm thrilled. She is very, very talented. And it's a way to ensure that we have a very strong community engagement framework that's baked into all of our programmatic and planning work.
So she's still gonna lead the outreach program.
She might have picked those icons. She might decide that she does not want to be senior planner of community engagement. But yes, no, she's our lead on engagement for Thurston 2045. And now that Maya's back, she'll be involved in that as well. But she's gonna be looking at our engagement efforts across all of our programs and planning projects. Oh, do you have another?
Yeah, I have one additional item. We did send out a survey. 7 of you did respond for both questions on a potential special meeting as well as the open forums in June. So it'd be great if we could get all the responses and we can confirm if we're gonna have a July 10th meeting as well as if we need to do any noticing.
That was July 26th that the question was for.
June 26th.
No, sorry, it's July 10th is the additional special meeting because July and June both have special holidays on one of the planning commission days. It drops it down to one, so we're trying to make up some of the losses. So the 26th is a special meeting, but then the 10th would be an additional special meeting.
I responded as though you asked about June, not July.
Kevin's response, I hate special meetings.
I know. Well, it's not
Surveys.
special, it's replacement meetings, because we would miss you otherwise.
I will say that I answered no on the July special meeting, but only because I don't know what our summer plans are yet.
Yeah, there was no maybe on that. It was yes, for sure.
Yeah, if there'd have been a maybe, I would have been.
Andrew, could you please resend it?
Yes, we can.
I don't think I got it.
It just went out today, right?
No, it went out last week, I believe.
Was it?
Went out on the end.
That's it.
All right. Thank you. And we can move on to calendar and agenda items. I think we've already talked about the June 5th meeting last week. We talked about whether or not we'd have a forum there. The 26th, I don't know if we've addressed yet, June 26th, the special meeting on the work session 16. Work session 1. For permit review and annual update. Does anybody know whether or not they will know specifically that they'll be gone for that one?
I'll be gone on the 26th.
Right. It sounds like it's still a quorum for that meeting. All right, moving on, unless we've got anything on calendar and agenda items. All right, moving on to good of the order. Do we have any good of the order? Nothing?
I was excited that your feedback led to some pretty robust outreach on LRA. State mandated sex offender housing, public hearing coming up, and it got picked up by the Chronicle yesterday, which usually planning commission stuff does not get picked up by the newspapers. So we'll see. It's been pretty quiet on all the other fronts, but we're gonna continue to do some social media pushes in the next weeks.
Thank you.
Somewhat tongue-in-cheek plug for a Rainier business that I'm not associated with, but right on the Western Chehalis Trail for people that use that, or excuse me, the Yom Tenino Trail. The little pizza burger shack in Rainier is gonna start serving Indian food.
Pizza and burgers. Wow.
In addition, or?
In addition, to their already eclectic menu.
All right.
So.
Is that the same gas station that sells fried chicken that's filled with
Yes.
crack?
Yes, that's the stuff.
What's your
That's
hobby?
the place.
If you all are interested in finding out why we have dying lakes, you can go to the Lake Lawrence YouTube channel at Lawrence Lake. And there's a 15-minute video that tells you why Lawrence Lake is dying. And then there's an attachment to that at the end. It's about a 35-minute video. It says, how do we keep our lakes from dying? And we've got 38 years of experience and data behind it. That's it. It's kind of dry and boring, that 35 minutes. To be honest with you, okay?
But it
Buy some
tells
Indian
you,
food and then sit down and watch the YouTube videos.
yeah, it tells you specifically what we've done for 38 years to try to improve the water quality of the lake. And what we're doing now and what we're doing in the future that we're trying to do, okay? So it's very interesting. The first one, I think y'all should watch because it tells you what's happened to all of our lakes. And specifically like.
So less tongue in cheek, there is a June 30th event in Rainier that we might want to add to that outreach. Upcoming engagement opportunities, I don't know what it's called.
If you want to go ahead and send that over to us, we can go ahead and add it
Find
to
it and
our
send it to
calendars as well.
Yeah,
as the agenda.
The Saturday.
Rainy Roundup.
Not Rainier Roundup, that's end of August.
And I'm kind of happy you brought up the agenda.
The bluegrass thing?
No, that's with Rainier Roundup.
There is an event coming up this weekend, Dia de la Familia on May 18th, from noon to 4 p.m. and the details are on the agenda.
You know, one north, is that the, that's CLO's location?
Yeah.
One north.
Yeah, and definitely as you hear his stuff, please send it our way. We're always looking for new ways to engage.
All right. Any additional good of the order? Having no other business, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Early. I don't think we.
Early? Late-ish early.
We could have talked about the water.
I know.
15 minutes.
Yeah, that's gonna be an interesting one.